All right, so you're trying to get your A plus, but you don't have any experience in IT. I was in the same position about several months ago before I got my A plus certification. Um, and I found there's a number of things that I was doing when studying for the A plus that wasn't working, and some of the things I did that were working. And so today I'm just going to quickly kind of go over what I found to be helpful for somebody that is approaching the A plus with a fresh set of eyes that has never really been exposed to IT. So the first thing that you need to understand about the A plus certification is that it is a mile wide and an inch deep. So whenever you go to study for the A plus, it's going to feel like you're going from topic to topic with a whole bunch of new terminologies and concepts that you've never heard of. And by the time you move on to the next topic, you're not going to really feel like you understand the previously mentioned concepts and terminologies in depth. And that's because CompTIA kind of barely touches on a whole bunch of things in IT. They really cover everything in IT, but they only cover it to a very small extent. And so, if you've never really had any IT experience, it's going to feel like you're being blasted with a whole bunch of information that you don't understand. And so that might be discouraging for some of you. You might be freaking out and thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to ever get any of this. And so, what I found that I was doing when I was initially studying is I would go through the material and I wouldn't quite understand some of the concepts that were being presented in a specific section of whichever core I was studying for. So, the core one or the core two. And so, what I would do is I would go back and try to reread what I had just read to try to gain an understanding of it. But the problem was is that I was rereading study materials that weren't really going into the details of these concepts to begin with. And so essentially I was hyperfixating and wasting time instead of just proceeding on with the rest of the study guide. So what I would recommend you do, just a study habit, is, and another thing before I say this, is you should have at least two sources to study from, because the A plus, as I said, as I mentioned earlier, it covers so much material that any one given study source that you stumble upon, whether it's Professor Messer or a study guide or Dion's courses, it's not going to cover every possible thing that you might be expected to know come exam time. And so, in order to really fill in the gaps, it's important to have, at the very least, two sources of study materials. I used a CompTIA study guide and I used Professor Messer's videos, and that was enough for me. But yeah, at least two is what I would recommend. But what I would do for the first go through of your study material, and I would do this for both of your study materials, is go through the study material one time for exposure. Don't get don't hyperfixate on trying to really understand the concepts. Allow yourself to be exposed to these new concepts and terminologies, and kind of try to process some of it. But if you don't quite get what they're talking about, or if you get hung up on something, don't hyperfixate on that. What I would recommend you do is keep proceeding with the rest of your study guide. Go all the way through it. And then after you've gotten through one of your source materials, move on to the other source material and go through all of it as well for exposure, right? If you do this, you will find yourself, because whenever I was first going through the study material, I was spending like a month going through it because I would just go back and reread it to try to really understand it in depth. But whenever I allowed myself to just read through the full thing for exposure, what I found was I was able to get through all the study materials with any given study source in about a week. And then what I found is after I reread the material after the fact, after the first read through, I was able to actually absorb the material a lot better the second time around. And so instead of wasting a month, I could get through the study material in 2 weeks, and I would take more from that than if I were to spend a month hyperfixating on something I didn't understand. So that's the first thing. That's how I would approach studying. Get through the study material, expose yourself to these new terminologies, and then after you've had that exposure, then try to absorb the material afterwards. Um, as far as, yes, the very next step, after, here's what I would recommend. let's say you have two study sources, get exposure on both of them, and then read through both of them for understanding. And so that's basically 4 iterations of studying. After you've gone through those 4 iterations, I would recommend purchasing some online practice exams. Um, what I what I use is I use Dion's practice exams, and I've read through many forums and have gathered the feedback of other people, and they say that Dion's practice exams for the A plus exam, they accurately reflect what you can expect to see on the A plus exams, but they're a little bit harder. So if you can pass his exams, then you can basically expect to pass the actual exams. There, another alternative is maybe Professor Messer's exams. He has some good exams as well, but Dion's, if you can pass his exams, you can be confident that you'll pass the actual exams. I would only recommend Dion's though for Core One. I found that Professor Messer's exams better reflected the requirements of Core 2, but Dion's practice exams for Core 1 are, I would say, probably better than Professor Messer's for Core 1. Um, but anyways, after you take your first practice exam, what you're going to find is you're actually going to, like, all of your weaknesses are going to be highlighted because the core CompTIA core exams are divided into different sections, and it might say that like hardware troubleshooting core one, you might say that you missed these number of questions that pertain to this specific exam objective, and so it'll allow you to see where your weaknesses actually are and where your strengths are, and so that will allow you to, like, on your next iteration after that practice exam, that'll allow you to study in an informed manner. You know really where you need to focus the third iteration as you go through both study materials. And I find, after you're taking just one practice exam, go back through the study material with a specific focus on your weaknesses this time. Now you can focus a little bit more. Maybe 1 to 2 iterations on both study materials, and then take the second practice exam for the core 1 or 2. And in my experience, by the second time I took it, I was making like 80%. What's the equivalent of an 80%? And so you want to be making it at least mid 70s to mid 80s on these exams, and then you'll know that you're basically ready to take the real thing. Now, as for whenever it comes time to actually take the exam, you're going to have 2 options. You're going to have the option to take the exam remotely with an online proctor, or you can go to a test facility on site. I would highly recommend that you take this exam on site. I took the exam on site, and I would say, based on the experiences I've read from other people, um, although it would seem that taking it remotely would be a lot less stressful, there's obviously the real possibility of having technological problems that result in your exam being revoked. But also, I've heard that online proctors are extremely picky and they will revoke your exam for the smallest little thing. Like, you might look away or move your arm around here somewhere, and if they can't see what you're doing, they're going to instantly revoke your exam, and then you just lost several $100s. And so you can mitigate a lot of that just by simply scheduling the test online. It doesn't cost anything extra to schedule it on site. I mean, so I would say do it on site so that you don't have to worry about, something with your computer breaking down, or with a particularly picky proctor or a lazy proctor that just wants to get it over with and just revoke your exam. Um, Lastly, this is just a little tidbit. This is not particular to studying for the CompTIA exam. This is just to save you some money. If you're a student and you have a .edu email address, you can actually purchase the CompTIA exam vouchers at half the price. So I would recommend that you can look that up. Go to Google, or I'll even include it in a link in the description so it's easier for you to find if you're a student. You can get like 50% off the exam vouchers, and that's hundreds of dollars you're saving. So if you're a student, don't spend several $100s on these exam vouchers. Use your student discounts and get it at a reasonable price. I think that's going to be it for this one. If you have any other questions, comment down below and I'll do my best to help you. Take care.